Hi, do you suffer from Sad Emblem Syndrome? Well, today I've got the cure. Yes, a needle. We're going to restore some painted emblems using a needle. It's a great method to flow paint into tight areas like this and get a really nice finish. If you have a classic car, motorcycle, boat, refrigerator with painted emblems, I think this will be a fun video. Or if you don't, just watch anyway. It's going to be good. Okay, let's go. So today I'm going to be working on these emblems from my 1973 Opel Manta that some of you guys are probably familiar with. Stage 1 is to remove the emblem safely. It's not a bad idea to use some masking tape and some plastic tools instead of metal to avoid the risk of scratching things. Your car may vary, it might be bolted on. Obviously do your research on how it's attached before you start prying on it. Once the emblems are off the car, we can start stripping the old paint. In my case, this isn't the original paint. This was a previous attempt by me to paint these that I didn't do very well. So it flakes off pretty easily. So I'm just going to use a pick to scratch away the old paint. And while I'm doing this, I'm going to scratch the entire background in an X pattern to give the new paint something to grip onto. If necessary, you can always soak your emblems in a paint stripping chemical to help soften it up and remove it. With all the paint gone, this is probably your best opportunity to try to clean and polish all the shiny parts of the emblem. These are aluminum, and I did the best I could by hand, but really this would be an ideal time for a Dremel with some small polishing bits on it. So here's the type of needle we're going to be using. It's just a cheap printer ink cartridge refill needle I got off Amazon, and it comes in a pack of several of them. I think there's 3 of them in a pack. The needle is a blunt tip. Obviously we don't need a sharp one for this. And they come in different sizes. I'll put on screen which size this is, I don't remember. But you want a happy middle ground where it's not going to be so small that it can't flow the paint, but you don't want it so big that too much is going to come out at once and you can't control it. So this size works well. And as you can see, you can take these apart and clean them out. So you can get a few uses out of them, I've found. So it should work just fine for this project. Here are the paints I'll be using. They're both gloss enamels, but this little one is a Tester's oil-based paint, and this big one is a water-based enamel from the craft store. I wanted to use both these, but they didn't have the red, so I thought I would try this one. The water-based one, it's really thick. I think it's meant to be brushed onto ceramics and stuff. So in order to thin it, because it's water-based, I can just use some distilled water. So I'm just going to go a little bit at a time until I get the consistency. A little at a time until it has the consistency that I want. It actually took some time to get this right. As you can see in these early tests, the paint just wants to pile up and form a mountain. This is much too thick. So I continued thinning and mixing and testing until it would actually flow out and flatten. This is more what we're looking for. And now we're just about ready to paint, but first we have to make sure the emblems are perfectly clean and free of contaminants. So I'm going to use wax and grease remover and brush it on these things however many times I need to make sure they're clean. So if you're dealing with emblems with pins like these ones, you'll need a way to work with them on a flat surface. So something I like to do is just take a cardboard box that's about the right size, and then you make an indent with the pins, and then you can poke the holes through with an awl or some sharp object, and then you have a nice perfectly flat surface to work on this. Okay, now we're happy with how the paint consistency is, and it's nicely mixed up. It's time to actually load up our syringe. Get it in there and just gently pull up. Try not to suck in any air. And this should be plenty. So now we'll do the cliche hospital trick where we flip it upside down. Look and see if you can see any bubbles. I'm gonna give it some taps. It actually looks pretty good. I don't see any bubbles. I'm going to do the typical upside down, squirt any air out. Yep, there was some air. Since we have so much extra paint, there's no need to be conservative, so I'm going to make sure I squirt all the air bubbles out. And that should be good. Alright, I think we're ready. One important tip here is to start in a corner and try to keep a continuous flow going the whole time without pausing. If we do get little air bubbles, there are ways to get rid of those. But just start gently pressing on the plunger and look at how precisely it flows. I got a little spot there, that'll clean up. Just apply some gentle, even pressure and it'll just flow out. Get it in the tight spots. And it's actually fairly intuitive. You can really control the flow with this needle. Just gradually work your way along. How much paint comes out will dictate how fast you move. Beautiful. It does look a little bit thick still, but it should lay down as it dries. This stuff has a pretty long curing time, especially now that we thinned it out quite a bit. So we're actually gonna have to let this sit for a few days before it's ready for the next stage. Nice. Oh, we got us a bubble. Yeah, this is what happens when we go back and... Oh, it popped. That's pretty awesome. Use an air blower. Aha! As is often the case with these kinds of projects, you'll get better at it as you go along and get more practice. It's not a bad idea to have a spare emblem to practice on before you do the real ones, but in my case I was willing to wing it. Well, that was pretty satisfying, and the results look really good. Considering how intricate these are, the mistakes I made are pretty minimal and should be easy to clean up. But we're not done yet. We have these little black areas to do in between the letters. So I opened up the tester's paint, and using a new needle, I did a little test just to make sure it was going to flow nicely. Then there was nothing left to do but go for it. These areas don't have as high of borders, so it's a little bit harder to make sure the paint's not going to overflow. So I just had to go slowly and be careful. And that's the great thing about the needle, is it's very controllable. Things actually went relatively well. Well, these turned out pretty nice. According to the label on the red paint, it actually takes 4 days to cure. So I'm just going to leave these somewhere where they're not going to get interfered with, preferably somewhere warm. I think that helps. But I guess I'll see you in a few days. Okay, it's been 24 hours, just thought I would check in. These did dry overnight, and as you can see, the red paint did flatten down, so that's nice. Also looks like the color mellowed out a little bit. It's sort of a darker red than I thought, but it looks good. There are a couple bubbles that showed up. I'm not sure if that's down to surface impurities or what, but they're not that noticeable. I was able to clean up some of the little edges that I had messed up by scraping a razor blade backwards over them, and that worked pretty well. Anyway, the directions say wait 4 days and then bake them, at least for the water-based paint. So we'll see once I do that if it has any effect on the finish. But overall, looking good. Okay, it's been 4 days, and now according to the instructions on the red paint, it's time to bake these. So I'm going to take these out of the cardboard box. And what we're going to do is put them in the oven when it's cold and bring it up to 325 for half an hour and then let them cool gradually. I'm just following exactly what the instructions say, which is usually a good idea. As you can see right now, it has a pretty good sheen to it. It's not a perfectly flat, perfectly glossy surface, but it's nice. So I'm curious if it'll look any different after baking. But it should be really durable, so I'm gonna just put these in my little toaster oven. So there they go. Bake. 325. Okay, I'll be back in half an hour. Okay, 30 minutes are up. Now I'm just supposed to prop the door open and let them cool off slowly, so we'll take a look in a little bit when they're back to room temp. Okay, these have had enough time to cool down. Let's see how they look. Well, I'm noticing some extra bubbles around the edges especially that I don't think were there before. Overall, the finish looks pretty good. It hasn't gotten any glossier. Meanwhile, the black looks like it held up just fine. I don't see any problems with it. Should I have used oil-based enamel on the whole thing rather than water-based? Maybe. I'm not a paint expert, so let me know in the comments if you have a better idea of what I should have used. But the main thing here is that needle painting method worked really great. I was able to get into these tight areas with minimal cleanup and really vastly improve these things. So let's throw them back on the car and see how it looks. I think I can call this project a success. A little bit disappointed in all the bubbling that happened after baking, but I put that down more to my lack of knowledge in paint and how to let it cure and bake it and stuff. That's the first time I've ever baked paint, so yeah. And you know, it's cheap craft store paint rather than you know, it's a small project. I didn't want to spend 20 bucks on a large thing of cyan enamel. So there's definitely some better quality paints out there. But honestly, for the effort and tiny amount of money put in, they turned out awesome. They look way better. And the needle method works great, as you saw. So that's the main takeaway from this video. Maybe don't choose the same paints that I did, but the method, yes. Well, what's next? I'm gonna do some other stuff with this car and others, so stay tuned to the channel, and I'll see you next time.